Welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is visiting 4 Eurasian countries along the Silk Road. He will also attend several annual meetings of regional cooperation. Is this packed schedule a sign that China has further strengthened its cooperation in the region? And the renminbi has fallen to its lowest level against the dollar in 6 years. Yet the financial market remains strong and officials seem unfazed. Why does the Chinese currency look so weak right now? And we begin today's show with Premier Li Keqiang's 8-day tour through Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Latvia, and Russia. During his visit, Li will also attend the 15th Prime Minister's meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, known as the SCO, and also the 5th Leaders Meeting of the China, Central and Eastern European, or CEE countries. This full schedule follows the ancient Silk Road route and is excludes the joint implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Enhancing regional cooperation. Premier Li Keqiang has started his 8-day official visit to Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Latvia and Russia. First stop, Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. The traditional friendship between the two countries has gained new momentum under the Belt and Road Initiative. China is now Kyrgyzstan's largest trade partner and its second largest source of foreign direct investment. The two sides are also cooperating on many infrastructure projects, including a rail line linking China, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. This project in particular is expected to invigorate the Kyrgyz economy.
We know that the country is full of potential, so railways, highways, all kind of infrastructure will be a foundation for this country to realize its potential. So what China is trying to do is to try to provide the country an opportunity to realize a bright future.
Premier Li will attend the 15th Shanghai Cooperation Organization Prime Ministers meeting in Bishkek. Li will then go on to Astana to attend the 3rd regular meeting between the Prime Ministers of China and Kazakhstan. After that, it's on to Riga, the capital of Latvia, where Li will attend the 5th summit of China and Central and Eastern European countries. As his last stop, Premier Li will meet Russian Prime Minister Medvedev in St. Petersburg. As the Belt and Road Initiative gains pace, Li's visit to these Eurasian countries will further enhance substantial cooperation along the Silk Road.
And for more discussion about the Chinese Premier Li's foreign trip in Beijing, we are having Professor Wang Yiwei, Director of the Institute of International Affairs at Renmin University in Beijing. In Bishkek, we are having Mr. Arslanbek Omurzakov, who is the Deputy Director of the Center for the Study of the Silk Road. That's a new institute organized by the President of Kyrgyz Republic. Meanwhile, joining us from Bangkok, we are having Dr. Nigel Gold-Davis, who is Associate Fellow at the Asia Program and the Russia-Eurasia Program at Chatham House. He's former British Ambassador to Belarus. Welcome to the three of you. May I start with you, Mr. Omurzakov? What do you make of the Chinese Premier's visit? It seems that during the 4 visits to the countries along the Silk Road, he's having a very comprehensive schedule to reach agreements with the 4 countries.
Thank you very much for your question. Now we are preparing the summit of SCO, of head of governments. So it is a traditional summit to finalize the results of the development of SCO countries. Now it is a very good period for strategic development of SCO. So Kyrgyzstan supports all initiatives in SCO. So we maintain the extension of the organization, and I think the schedule of Mr. Li Keqiang will be very active, who initiate a lot of new ideas, and I think we will support all ideas in the area of cooperation, exceptionally in economic cooperation in different areas, also in energy and transport and others.
Well, it seems very comprehensive, Professor Wang from Beijing. China, of course, has this Belt and Road Initiative to begin with. However, it takes a lot of cash, a lot of joint efforts from all sides in order to make it happen. So, with such a comprehensive list of agreements to be signed between the Chinese premier and his counterparts in the four countries, how likely will these initiatives eventually be implemented?
Well, after 3 years of promotion, I think we reached so many consensus. At least 100 countries, international organizations, including United Nations, agree to participate or show the positive gesture to Belt and Road Initiative. So far, China signed with more than 36 countries about to jointly build the Belt and Road Initiative, and more than 26 countries signed the International Capacity Cooperation deal with China.
And of course, Kyrgyzstan is a very special country. It was there that the Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the specific ideas about the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, because Kazakhstan is the largest landlocked country in the world.
That's right. And to you, Dr. Davis, while you are observing the issues from afar, what do you make of the speed of this Belt and Road Initiative and also the implementation?
Yes, as for the speed, I'd make 2 points here. First, there are certainly some concrete achievements already. I draw attention in particular to the dry port at Khorgos on the border between China and Kazakhstan, and there are ambitious plans to develop that into a larger logistics center. There are also rail lines going ahead. But secondly, and probably more important, I think that if we're concerning the question of speed, there's an English expression that you make haste slowly. Now, what China is doing is something that it's never done on this scale before. It's reaching out really across the continent, developing a concept of economic diplomacy that many welcome, but China is aware also that there are some local concerns among some parts of some of the population's questions about what this means. So I think it's right to develop a cautious strategic approach rather than rushing into things, to prepare the ground carefully for what will be part of China's larger historic long-term reaching out across the entire continent. So, as I say, make haste but make it slowly.
Professor Wang, do you agree?
Well, of course, it's a huge project, it's a long-term. But it's not just China's project. It's it's a mutual connectivity, basically in the Eurasian continent, but also extend to Africa and other countries. It's inclusive. It's open. It's not just a strategy of China.
For you, Professor, Mr. Omurzakov, in Kyrgyzstan, what does this Belt and Road Initiative really mean for countries like yours? How much do you think your future potential of blueprint for your country's economy is linked to China's grand plan? And how much role does your country, Kyrgyzstan, would like to play and can play in terms of implementing this grand plan?
Yeah, Kyrgyzstan, as other Central Asian countries, plays a strategic role in the extension of the Chinese strategy One Belt, One Road. So I think the future constructed roads constructed by Chinese companies and railway and also the pipelines constructed across Kyrgyz territory will play a big role in the implementation of the Chinese strategy.
But on the other hand, what role can you play? I mean, there's issues of personnel, there's issue of capital, there's issue of how to make sure once the constructions are being completed, various subjects, it will be implemented and will be smoothly in operation. So how are the roles being divided? Kyrgyz, what role can you play?
Last year, our presidents signed the program of cooperation between two countries, 2015 and 2025. So now the head of governments will discuss the practical realization of the program, and I think in order to implement any strategy, One Belt, One Road, all countries play a big role, but exceptionally Kyrgyzstan, which had the borders with China, will play the role to get the access to, for example, to Tajikistan and Afghanistan, in order to extend these ways. And I think the Kyrgyzstan could play as a transit point from China. I think also Kyrgyzstan, it's a important point in order to have an access to Uzbekistan. As you know, we were discussing now the project of railway from China across Kyrgyzstan to Uzbekistan. I think here Kyrgyzstan plays a big role.
I see. Professor Wang, you know, it is very have guests on any international network coming from Kyrgyzstan or Kazakhstan, but with this, the Belt and Road Initiative, we could hear voices from some of these Central Asian countries, even though we still have some delay in the quality of the voices, and yet we could hear their voices, and also it's about connectivity. But Professor Wang, let me go to an even more important question about not just the Belt and Road Initiative, but also the other part of the itinerary for Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, that is SCO's anniversary this year, and started with an initiative against terrorism and military cooperation. But now it's about energy, it's about economy, it's about many other initiatives. Many wonder, Professor Wang, has this SCO expanded too fast, too widely in this agenda? Meanwhile, what exactly is it going to play its role in the region?
Well, I don't think so. The SCO can play a more important role besides security cooperations among Central Asian countries with Russia and China. But now we invite more participants from India, Pakistan, because I think the mutual connectivities, facilities, trade, and finance, this cooperation can help to contribute to regional stability and world peace. So development security is highly linking. So anti-three evils, we should also pay high attention for poverty lifting and also mutual connectivity and people-to-people bond. I think this is contribute to the same goal.
Dr. Davis, your observation?
Yes, no, I agree with that. I think that we are seeing a shift in the center of gravity of the SCO from its original security mandate towards a much more economic agenda. And I think that makes sense against the background of the larger move towards greater connectivity across the region. There's the additional point that expansion and the bringing in of new members also brings with it new challenges, particularly if those members themselves have complex security relationships with one another. So India and Pakistan, of course, are not always at peace with one another. It therefore makes sense to shift ground onto areas where a consensus is more likely rather than less likely to be achieved.
But what about the role of SCO for the region? We've seen different kinds of regional mechanism platforms being established over the past few years. Dr. Davis, what do you make of the existence of so many different platforms? And is SCO eventually going to stand out among them? For what?
Achievements of the SCO so far in the security sphere have disappointed some. In practice, it's been very difficult to establish effective practical cooperation, even on the anti-terrorism, on which there is a consensus among members, and on which one would want to see, particularly in Central Asia, with rising concerns about terrorist activity. We want to see progress. There's been relatively little joint work, for example, with respect to the growing concerns about the leaking of terrorism from Afghanistan, with planned troop withdrawals there from the West. And so I think the track record is one that's been perhaps less than some of its parts.
Mr. Omuzakov, would you like to respond to what Dr. Davis just said? Whether SCO has really fulfilled their role, for example, even about the basic issue fighting against terrorism and about countries' cooperation?
Yes, I think SCO also plays a big role in order to ensure the security in the Central Asia. As you know, there was a terroristic attack on the eve of our Independence Day, 30th August, in the Chinese embassy. And this terroristic attack shows that Central Asian countries are still vulnerable for terrorism. And after that, during September, we had military trainings, SCO forces, against terroristic scenarios as in Syria. And we thought that it was very good answer for terrorism. There was trainings in Bishkek against some scenarios, but we can say that terrorism is still a big threat in Central Asia. I think maybe SCO will cooperate with other security organizations as CSTO with Russia ahead, leading by Russia.
Professor Wang.
Definitely. Terrorist is a trans-border. If you just focus on Central Asia, maybe you can still have some difficulties because many terrorists from Syria, even from South Asia. So we need more cooperations and the training of the anti-terrorist forces.
There's another part of Chinese Premier Li's trip that is going to Russia and to have this regular Prime Minister's meeting with the Russian Prime Minister, his counterpart, with very strong presidential leadership, shall we say, in both countries, both China and also Russia. What do you make of the significance of this working meeting between the two prime ministers, Mr. Professor Wang?
Well, China-Russian relations is, I think, is a model for great power relations. It's a non-alliance. It's no target any other single country, and mutual trust, win-win cooperations. I think SCO is one of the achievements, and at the same time now with the Belt and Road Initiative, the mutual connectivities among the Central Asia continent also need China and Russia cooperate.
However, Professor Wang, we see China and Russia propose different possibilities and platforms. Belt and Road Initiative proposed by China, and also the Eurasian community coming from Russia. They do have some overlapping areas, for example, Central Asia and also Central European countries. So is there going to be a competition, or this is more like a cooperative relationship regarding the future platform?
Well, I don't think it's a confrontation or conflict. You know, Belt and Road Initiative highlights the principles, so-called the synergies of strategies that Eurasia Economic Union with Belt and Road, they signed actually jointly to cooperations. So it's not a zero-sum game. At the same time, we respect that Russia's influence in Central Asia, even in other places. They speak Russians, they have the traditional linkages, energy and facilities. So I think Chinese wisdom is not to do manners, it's to, I think, do the work of the 1+1, and then to reach the even more than 3 effects. That kind of wisdom, I think, still work.
Okay, and Dr. Davis, before we go, final question briefly for you. You see this Chinese premier making its 8-day trip to Central and Eastern European countries. Many believe it's a reflection of how much emphasis China is putting on this part of the world. You're coming from the UK yourself with the Chatham House. You know how much most of the European continent, particularly South and also Western Europe, is now being dragged down by the migrant crisis. What do you make of the potential of this area, I mean, Eastern and Central European regions? And what would that mean, the China's cooperation closely with this region for the other parts of Europe? Dr. Davis.
Yes. No, I think symbolically the scope of Premier Li's visit is very interesting and significant. Recall that in recent months in the West there is talk of a growing crisis of globalization. We've had Brexit, of course. We've had the uncertainties that the Trans-Pacific Partnership has run into, particularly in the context of the American presidential campaign, and other concerns as well. The EU-Canada Trade Investment Treaty, which barely squeaked through. So against that background, it is interesting that the aspiration to develop a greater Eurasian economic area is being led really, I think at this point, by China, which is increasingly becoming, it seems to me, a producer, not just a consumer, of initiatives and institutions. And recall, too, that the scope of this trip is not something that, say, the Russians would be able to do. The 16+1 CEE meeting in Latvia really could not happen with a Russian interlocutor, given the sanctions regime between the EU and Russia at the moment. So I think symbolically we should pay attention to the length and significance of this visit. And as we know, more and more European countries, and not only those in Central and Eastern Europe, are looking to China as an investment partner. Final point on the Russian-Chinese end part of this visit. I think the most significant point here is the date. It will take place, it will finish on the 9th of November. That's one day after the presidential election in the United States. So I suspect that outcome, if it's clear, will be an important talking point for the two leaders.
I'm sure the presidential election in the U.S. will be a talking point for the capital after it's done. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis, Mr. Almurzakov, and also Professor Wang. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. The Chinese yuan has fallen to its lowest rate against the dollar in 6 years, causing jitters amongst investors. Yet the renminbi is stable against other currencies, and the Chinese economy is staying strong, as the Chinese government says. With further depreciation, it's a question mark. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight, coming to you Monday to Friday, every day on CCTV News. The Chinese yuan's depreciation against the US dollar has continued for almost a month. The fluctuation is drawing attention from the international markets. Although China's central bank reassured markets it would keep the yuan stable, some investors are still worried about a sudden depreciation of the currency. Let's take a look at the latest situation.
The lowest in 6 years. China's central bank set the yuan at 6.7858 against the US dollar last Friday. That's a decline of about 1.5% since the end of September. The government says there's no long-term pressure on the yuan to depreciate further.
There are uncertainties in the global economy which led to a weak recovery worldwide, so these factors brought some pressure on the renminbi. But in medium and long term, there is no reason for the currency to further depreciate.
Some say this round of declines was mainly driven. During the same period the yuan depreciated, the dollar climbed 2.1% as investors speculated on the US Federal Reserve readying for an interest rate hike.
Our view is that basically when the dollar is strong, they'll allow the currency to tread water on a trade-weighted basket, which means dollar CNY edges higher. And when the dollar is weaker, then they'll allow the CNY trade-weighted to weaken.
The currency's weakness has revived memories of a surprise devaluation last August and another rapid depreciation early this year, falls that spread turmoil in global financial markets. China recently joined the approved currencies in the International Monetary Fund's basket of special drawing rights. The IMF believes this will enhance the stability and growth of China and the international economy as a whole. As the yuan's internationalization continues, the fluctuations of the currency are affecting the global financial market. So how to make the Chinese currency stable is a big concern for the whole world.
Well, we are joined here in the Beijing studio to talk about the RMB depreciation recently. Mr. Aswar Prasad, professor of economics at Cornell University, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, also author of the recent published book, Gaining Currency, The Rise of the renminbi. Really? The rise of the renminbi? We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Professor, welcome to our program. Meanwhile, we're joined in Hong Kong by Professor Xiao Geng, Professor of Practice in Finance and Public Policy with the University of Hong Kong. Professor Xiao, welcome as well. What do you two make of the depreciation over the past few weeks, if not months, of RMB toward US dollar? May I have Professor Xiao very briefly to help us understand your reasons?
Well, it's mainly because RMB is trying to de-link or weakening the link with US dollar, and trying to use the basket as a benchmark. So that caused this weakening in terms of US dollars. Yeah.
What about you, Professor?
Now, certainly the People's Bank of China has been trying to convey the message that it is trying to manage the currency's value against the basket, as Professor Xiao Geng mentioned. The question is whether the market really buys it, because the reality is that most market participants within and outside China still very much focus on the CNY dollar rate. But unlike last year when the RMB depreciated and all hell broke loose, this time markets are taking it a lot more calmly because the situation has changed. China's economy seems to be in better shape. The capital outflow problem has decreased. So at some level, I think it's defensive posturing by the PBOC, because there is the anticipation that with the Fed rate hike and with further easing of monetary policy by the Bank of Japan and the European Central Bank, the dollar will rise, and you don't want the yuan to rise too much along with that.
Well, for A-share market here in China, on the mainland, very calm, not much reaction. However, for Hong Kong, it is mainly international investors over there. There are, and there have been, quite some strong reaction, to say the least. Professor Xiao?
Well, the market people, they still look at the RMB and the US dollar exchange rate, because that's what people get used to. So for them, if they see RMB depreciate significantly against the US dollar, they will start to hedging against any further decline. So that's why a lot of people in Hong Kong and also in mainland China, they are starting to hedging against the possible future depreciation. And this is actually necessary and useful, because most Chinese households and companies, they holding RMB assets, very little US dollar assets. So certain degree of diversification is actually very useful for the financial systems in China and also for the global economy.
But the question is, the RMB, of course, depreciated against the US dollar, but many currencies against the US dollar over the past few months. And RMB against some of the other major currencies actually appreciate rather than depreciated.
Now, certainly on a trade-weighted basis, the move is hardly as dramatic as suggested by the CNY dollar rate. But again, as Professor Xiao Geng mentioned, the reality is that a lot of trading still takes place in the CNY dollar bilateral trades. That is still the thickest trade among all the bilateral currency pairs. So that's what the market needs to focus on. Now, the question is whether this depreciation of the RMB against the dollar is going to lead to another wave of capital outflows. And there, I think we are seeing relative calm right now, because the PBOC and SAFE have managed to clamp down on capital flight. And so long as the government is able to manage the other capital outflows, which they can if you're generating a trade surplus of $500 to $600 billion a year, plus another $80 worth of FDI inflows, then all the math adds up. And a gradual depreciation of the RMB is perfectly consistent with gradual outflows and the economy remaining calm and stable.
But you know, Professor Xiao, capital outflow has been a long discussed topic, and yet it has always been there over the past few years. That, in a way, has indicated certain issues. Professor Xiao, what do you make of it? And is this capital flight eventually going to have enormous amount or to a certain extent kinds of impact on various factors of China's financial reform, or influencing China's speed of the financial reform?
Well, capital flight, if concentrated in a few months, then it will have problems. But if it is just like SY has mentioned, if it's gradual and steady, and also together with capital inflows, which the foreign investors, especially pension funds, and also central banks, they actually need to hold more Chinese assets. So the key is actually to managing this swap. The Chinese households and enterprises, they need to diversify. They need to put some of their assets out of China and to get a better return and also better pricing in terms of domestic asset relative to the foreign assets. And that's in the long run is actually necessary and very useful. But if every Chinese households and companies are doing this at the same time, it will have problems. At the same time, the foreign central banks, pension funds, they actually underweighted the Chinese asset. So they need to increase their weight. And the issue is that they still watching the performance of the Chinese central bank and the Chinese government, because they are concerned about the capital flows when they invest in China, whether they can take money out of China in the future. So a lot of these issues are causing short-term tension.
That's right.
Otherwise, I would actually see more capital inflows, from foreign investors.
Professor Prasad, it's a chicken and egg thing, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, the government and the central bank wants to make sure the amount of capital outflow would not exceed the level that would necessarily going to impact negatively on the Chinese economy. But on the other hand, once policies are out aiming at control capital outflow, it would be taken as signals that China's financial reform may not be as fast as people would expect it to be. So it's a very delicate balance, isn't it, Professor Prasad?
It's certainly a delicate balance. If one thinks about this in the broader context of internationalizing the RMB, certainly opening up the capital account both to inflows and to outflows is a very important part of the process. Letting the currency's value be market determined is part of the process, and invariably there is going to be some volatility in exchange rates and capital flows. That is normal so long as these flows are responding to macroeconomic conditions. But what we saw last year was not only diversification-led outflows, but also some carry trade as corporations were paying down their foreign currency debt, but also a lot of capital flight through unofficial or illegal channels, through trade misinvoicing, money going out to the gambling dens in Macau. And that's what the government really wanted to control, because that is not the right kind of capital outflows. But the problem then is that the policy responses one sees from the Chinese government create a sense of unpredictability. And in fact, trying to maintain the stability of the exchange rate creates complications for other policies that then cause foreign investors, both official and private, to start wondering what the policy environment is going to look like in the future. And that's not good for Chinese financial market development, the policy framework stability, or for the internationalization of the RMB.
Sounds too complicated for me already, Professor Xiao. That complicated job, but that complicated balance in a way.
Well, I think the PBOC actually has been doing a very good job. And that's why the market now has calmed down. But I think going forward, the key is to really watch the RMB and US dollar exchange rate, because that's really most households and companies are watching for. So in the way, the Chinese authorities, they have to have a delicate balance to make sure that people start to diversify, to do rational, investment, but not, causing any panics, in the short run because of abrupt, volatilities in the exchange rate.
That's right. Well, we are talking about some of the domestic factors, how the Chinese side, whether it's financial officials or coming from the general society in the market, can and should respond. But things are much more complicated even than that, because we also got international factors. China's RMB now internationalizing. China's financial reform is going through its process at a time of very volatile international situation, given the recent economic realities of many economies. It's already this time the depreciation of RMB, the fourth yuan depreciation since the central bank announced an exchange rate reform in August last year. The first round, as we mentioned earlier, came right after the reform, when the central parity rate of yuan against the dollar dropped 4.7% in 2 weeks. Then this year, January, with many expecting the Federal Reserve to increase the interest rates, the yuan depreciated 3.9% compared to November 2015. And then from mid-April to mid-July, when Brexit brought uncertainty, yuan depreciated once again, hit 4%. Of course, the devaluation this time, some say, is similar to the scale, at least, compared to that of January earlier this year. But Professor Prasad, that's why I want to invite your wisdom here. People talk about another change of the decision from the Federal Reserve, so people are expecting maybe further changes, maybe RMB once again depreciate, or volatility with the Chinese market. Professor?
It could well depreciate relative to the dollar, and it should, given the cyclical circumstances of the US economy versus the Chinese economy, because the US economy is on an upswing, and in China growth seems to have stabilized, but there are still weaknesses in this economy, especially in terms of export growth. So it might make sense for the RMB to depreciate, but certainly China is a big economy right now, and a sharp depreciation of the RMB against the other currencies would create problems for everybody. So I think the notion of the PBOC managing the currency's value against a basket so that the CNY dollar rate may drop, but at the same time, the CNY, if anything, appreciates against the other major currencies, may in fact be the right thing for China and for the world economy.
Okay. Professor Xiao, I always want to make things more complicated for both of you. So let me mention several factors once again. On the one hand, you have RMB internationalization into the SDR basket, and also financial reform, whatever the pace is going on inside the country. On the other hand, you also have international factors. Earlier, Professor Prasad mentioned many of them, unexpected future economic realities. So at this point, how should we read the appreciation or depreciation of the RMB? And to what extent that we shouldn't be worried? To what extent if things become worrisome?
Well, my view is that now people should feel confident that the RMB will be stabilized and even appreciate in the future, because the big picture, China's growth has now bottomed. PPI, the index already turned positive from negative, and the political uncertainty, also reduced. So if you look at the longer term, actually, there's good reason to see productivity increase and RMB to appreciate in the future. And also the property market, which now under short-term control on demand side, which eliminates future bubble, and that also helps to stabilize the currency. So I don't really see really substantive factors which will lead to any significant depreciation of the RMB, either against the basket or against the US dollar.
All right, Professor Prasad, the final thought.
No, there is a lot of concern about volatility in the RMB, but if you look at the big currencies like the dollar, the euro and the yen, they are very volatile and there is no concern about them. So I think the real focus should be here on the quality of macroeconomic policies in China. The exchange rate is seen as a buffer that is going to move depending on cyclical conditions, business cycle conditions in China and in the rest of the world. So even if China is doing very well, if there is turmoil in the rest of the world, the RMB dollar rate in particular is going to be quite volatile. I don't think that volatility by itself is a problem. It's more the unpredictability of policies and the notion of trying to keep the RMB stable and how that leads to unpredictable policies. It makes it difficult to move forward on capital account opening, financial market reform. That is the real problem. So I think predictable policies and a volatile exchange rate may not be a bad combination.
Do not just focus on the RMB exchange rate. Look at the policies and look at elsewhere in the world. Those are, I guess, the advice given by the two professors with us. Thank you so much, Professor Xiaogang and Professor Eswa Prasad. And by the way, congratulations for that wonderful book, Gaining Currency. Thank you so much for both of you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.